He's UA's Santa Claus, PK's boogeyman, and the superhero of thousands and thousands of Brazilians crazy about motorsport. Or not. When he's racing, everyone is there, glued to the screen, watching. Step on it, Ayrton.
The more time goes by, the clearer it becomes that we will never have a national idol who comes close to what Ayrton Senna was. For those who lived through his era, his name is much more than just a memory. It's a deep nostalgia, an emotion that has the power to bring back childhood, youth, parents, grandparents, and those joyful Sundays that brought friends and family together in front of the television to watch a Brazilian being admired around the world. Senna awakened the pride of being Brazilian, the pride of seeing the country represented by someone who defied stereotypes. He brought together qualities rarely associated with Brazilians, such as discipline, strategic thinking, and commitment. All of this combined with three qualities that are more common and recognized in our people: emotion, faith, and determination. This mix made many see Ayrton as the best of the Brazilian people in a single man. And in times of chaos and uncertainty, he was hope personified. He was the Brazil we wanted to be.
If anything ever came out, my only feeling, without having thought about it, without anything, was to add the word Brazil to his name.
When I look at the races, interviews, reports, movies, and series we have about Senna, I'm even more certain that we'll never see another idol in Brazil who reaches his greatness.
The affection of the Brazilian fans who invade the track, who want to be close to their idol.
For many people, Senna embodied qualities that are rare today. It's as if his patriotism, character, passion, charisma, determination, courage, and will to win are now buried in the past, as if they could no longer be found in the great names of our country. But is that really the case? Here, you'll see a different point of view, an analysis of the contrast between Senna and the current world from a less passionate perspective. A perspective that suggests that, most likely, the lack of national idols is much more a consequence of the context we live in than a lack of figures with the potential for idolatry.
Shy, polite, friendly, dead.
But let's move on to this analysis so that we can begin to understand how Senna became this unattainable figure. We need to look carefully at his death.
Senna crashed hard.
A moment that will stay in the memory of all Brazilians. The farewell to Ayrton Senna in São Paulo.
Never before had a crowd of 250,000 people moved with such calm in such deep silence. The line outside lasted through the night, waiting for the last contact with the idol. It was only 10 seconds, but how they made the most of them. The raised fist showed that only pride is greater than sadness.
Ayrton Senna died at his peak at 34, in front of all of Brazil watching the tragedy live.
Senna is inside the car and absolutely no one is arriving.
He left while the country still carried the dream of seeing him achieve more glory, interrupting a cycle of victories that already seemed certain. That could have boosted him higher in Formula One's historical rankings.
A fourth Formula One title was far more certain than a fourth for Brazil's soccer team, since Ayrton Senna, on the world's best team, practically guaranteed it for us.
Looking at it another way, his death not only ended a successful career, but also spared us from witnessing his inevitable athletic decline. Senna's death took him out of ordinary judgment and placed him on an unreachable pedestal. He never grew old, never became irrelevant, and never made future mistakes that could compromise his legacy. Unlike other public figures who remain active and eventually become targets of criticism or indifference, as has happened with several national idols like Pelé, who faced various criticisms during his life for interviews and personal and political choices, or with Ronaldinho Gaúcho and Ronaldo Phenomenon, for instance.
I made a big mistake in my personal life. The moment I realized it wasn't what I was looking for, I pulled out.
Imagine Ayrton Senna retired, having his political stance revealed, making controversial statements or taking actions that divided opinions. All of this was avoided by his sudden absence, which crystallized his memory in perfection, intensifying the respect and honor of his name, making him a legend above everyday disputes.
You either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
And I'm not trying to suggest that Senna was a bad person, but just that while we're here, we can be seen and touched. But more importantly, that we're still subject to making mistakes. His physical absence created a gap that was filled by narratives that praised his dedication, patriotism, and winning spirit. With images and records immortalized, a lot of national symbolism, and a collective idealization that created an overwhelming nostalgia around his figure. Death by itself is almost an insurmountable taboo in our culture. Criticizing someone who has already passed away is seen as an almost criminal act, especially when that person left in a tragic way, and even more so, while fighting to bring joy to their people. Consider the burden of this social taboo. Raising criticisms or negative points makes you seem insensitive, as if you were committing a sin. This creates a protective field around the person's memory and turns it into something idealized, almost superhuman.
Why weren't you there while other champions were at Ayrton's funeral?
I was never the kind of friend who goes to funerals. Now, why would I go to a funeral? Just to show up there, to be seen at the funeral.
Anyone who looks deeper into Senna's story will find some gaps that today wouldn't be well received, but ended up being covered up by the phenomenon of his death. But what caught my attention the most about this phenomenon of death were the many accounts from his ex-girlfriends that kept coming up while I was doing my research for this video. And it's impressive how the memories of these romantic relationships are filtered through a lens of idealization, where what could have been stands out more than what actually was.
She says he was her true love. That Senna was the love of her life.
Death, when it puts an end to interactions and possibilities, leaves room for idealized narratives to be created, shaped by longing and positive moments. I don't want to use the mystique of death to diminish Senna's value or achievements. I just want to show how this factor was crucial in building the image he has today. But it doesn't stop there. Some other factors also contributed to this great idolization, one of the main ones being the context of his time. And here we see, in practice, something that is very well described by the writer Robert Greene in his book, The 48 Laws of Power. More specifically, when he mentions law number 16, use absence to increase respect and honor. In the 80s and 90s, public figures kept a much greater distance from the public. Their appearances were rare and mostly limited to interviews, races, and ads. Without social networks, there wasn't the constant information flow we have today. This created an air of mystery around Senna, something that contributed to building his mystique. The public saw the idol, not the man. That was essential for creating a national hero, which is now unimaginable. If we look at what is probably our greatest national idol today, access to his private life is total. Social media, paparazzi, leaks. It's practically impossible for him to leave his house without being photographed or filmed. The news spreads everywhere. And any slip-up can be enough to bring him down, something that has happened repeatedly in his career.
Carnival is a party for everyone. Now with a camera, just pretending. With this guy, it's tough to accomplish anything meaningful.
No way. Every man makes mistakes. We're imperfect, not unstable, just inconsistent. Therefore, the more you're exposed, the more inevitable it becomes for your flaws to come to light and tarnish your image.
Unfortunately, we're not always available or in the right mindset to give back that positive energy.
But in terms of absence, it's interesting to look at what's happening specifically today. I'm recording this in December 2024, when Neymar is more distant, playing in Arabia, battling injuries, and missing many games. And it's already possible to notice how this absence has changed people's opinions about him a little. Despite ongoing criticism, I notice more nostalgia toward him. Limited exposure can soften perceptions and restore lost respect. Neymar, once constantly in the spotlight and controversy, is now awaited for his return or remembered with nostalgia. And when we talk about this change in perception, which happens when a distance is created between the figure and the public, another fundamental aspect in the making of idols comes into play: the role of the media. In Ayrton Senna's case, we're talking about a time when access to information was not only limited, but also highly centralized. As I mentioned before, there were no social networks or multiple competing news sources presenting different narratives. The public's view of Senna was shaped almost exclusively by Rede Globo and the advertising campaigns that promoted him as a national hero. And in this scenario, Galvão Bueno was a major spokesperson for the mystique of Senna. Every race was a spectacle, with Senna as the undisputed star. There was no way to closely follow his main rival, Alain Prost. You couldn't track him on Instagram or check what the French media said about him online. Nearly all information Brazilians received was filtered, portraying Senna as the hero and Prost as the villain.
He was the little Brazilian who beat the Europeans. He was the guy who made people wake up earlier.
Rare criticisms lacked both presence and relevance to challenge the national media's influence. Note how this narrative monopoly encouraged idealization. The Brazilian public knew Senna only as the heroic figure that was carefully constructed. There was little space for questions, complexities, or opposing views that challenged his status as a perfect icon. This media construction turned Senna into a symbol of a successful Brazil, of victory against all odds. Why would anyone tear that down? That's what the Brazilian people needed during a time of major economic and social difficulties.
Especially for us Brazilians who have had so few joys in recent years, only you were able to bring true happiness, to awaken the self-esteem of Brazilians.
The people needed someone to inspire, motivate, and give them a reason to smile.
Whatever position you have in life, whether it's the highest or the lowest social level, always have as your goal a lot of strength and a lot of determination. And always do everything with a lot of love and a lot of faith in God. One day you'll get there.
It's clear that for all this image that was built to be sustained, Senna had to perform. Something had to be delivered on his side. And if we're talking about delivering, here's one area where he never failed to impress.
I was never. A Senna fan always believed Gilles Villeneuve was the greatest driver. But to make this film, I've watched hours and hours and hours of footage. And the thing is, Villeneuve was spectacular on a number of occasions. Senna was spectacular every single time he got in a car.
Ayrton. I knew it.
Senna was a showman. He knew how to perform like few others. He gave everything on the track. Someone driven by his compulsion to win.
My desire for success and victory is so strong that whatever needs to be done in terms of dedication and work to achieve the goal, I do it.
He was obsessed. And this fearless and bold way of his, just as it created a legion of fans around the world, also attracted many critics. For many, he was irresponsible, an unrestrained, ambitious man, a dangerous driver, and sometimes even disrespectful to others.
And here he comes. Senna is going to start on the inside. It's a moment of anticipation. The start is very important. He later said, if I didn't turn first, I wouldn't get to turn.
There's a limit, and I think he went beyond that limit that day.
The engines rev up, green light. Senna tries to get ahead. Prost had a better start and took the lead. Prost.
I think it was probably the worst thing I've ever seen. On a racetrack, there were 24 cars right behind him.
Senna pushes, goes on the inside. And the crash between the two. And then If the race continues, it's the end of the championship.
Only a madman would do that. It was cold.
Senna turns his back on Prost, turns his back on Prost. If the judge determines the continuation of the race, the championship is over, and Ayrton Senna is the 1990 champion.
That was one of Ayrton's flaws. I would have preferred that he won the championship in another way.
It's not a bad feeling, is it?
That perspective was rarely heard here in Brazil. For us, Senna was an idol, an altruist, a patriot who risked his life to make his people happy. But there are those who believe he was a manipulator, someone who bought the media and literally did everything to feed his unbridled ego with more achievements and admiration. And when we fall into this dilemma, we see a large majority choosing a side and embracing it blindly, as if the truth were simple, binary, a matter of this or that. But reality can be much more complex, and it's this complexity that most of us ignore because we prefer to live as hostages to the beliefs we choose. In Senna's case, we saw a majority who embraced and accepted everything the media presented as absolute truth. How could it be different? His races united Brazil in celebration. People who, for a few hours, forgot their everyday problems and found in Senna's victory a reason to smile. It's not so different from what we see every 4 years at the World Cup. Moments when the people come together in shared joy. With Senna, this happened almost every weekend. In moments like this, such as Senna at the World Cup or any major collective event, we face a range of perspectives. Everyone interprets and feels based on their experiences, beliefs, interests, and current needs. However, if we analyze these different views more deeply, we will notice that no matter how distinct they may seem, they can be classified within something I call the 3 dimensions of perception. In the first dimension is the majority. It is the space of escapism, of comfort. Here, people look for meaning outside themselves, finding in figures like Senna a reason to believe, to belong, to feel proud. It is the dimension of blind idolatry, where the narrative presented by the media is consumed without question. Senna was the hero, the savior, the symbol of a Brazil that was working. And, as much as this brought emotional relief, this perception also created dependency. His victory was everyone's victory, his defeat a collective pain. There was no room for contradictions. Here, what is presented to you is reality, and these people end up living as hostages to that. In the second dimension, there are those who start to question themselves. They see beyond the superficial narrative. They analyze what's behind the spectacle. These people can see that Senna, just like any other idol, was also a media construct, a figure who served larger interests such as uniting and distracting the people. It's common for people at this level to feel superior due to their different perception. They even choose rebellion and rejection to prove their superiority. This is where people claim all of this is just a sham. That's why Brazil is called Bostal. None of that matters. And the problem isn't with these beliefs themselves, but with the way they hold on to them. Although these ideas might seem liberating at first glance, they usually end up creating another kind of imprisonment. Criticism becomes an obsession and cynicism turns into a trap. Sometimes, people become so consumed by anger and hatred that they don't realize they're still trapped in the same game. And what's most curious is that these people tend to be quite influential. Even people from the first dimension start blindly following these ideas just as they once did with idolatry. And then we reach the third dimension. Here are those who have freed themselves from these shackles. These people see the complexity of the figure of Senna and everything he represented. But they don't let it consume them. They're not dependent on narratives or so cynical that they reject everything. They fall outside this dichotomy. In the third dimension, admiring Senna isn't blind idolization, and criticizing him isn't total dismissal. It's the space of fluidity, where you can recognize the impact of his achievements without making them the foundation of your identity or your emotions. They can cheer, celebrate, reject, or stay apathetic, but shouldn't let it define them or carry too much weight in their lives. The third dimension is the state where you live more lightly, without the burdens of the narratives that imprison us. Returning to the scene, I want to make it clear I wasn't trying to damage your image or diminish your status as a national idol. I don't want to diminish your greatness, but just remind you of your humanity. After all, maybe true idols aren't the ones we idealize as perfect, but those whom we choose to admire even after seeing their flaws and complexities. Because I believe it's not perfection that inspires us, but the courage to be extraordinary despite the imperfections we carry. But let's be honest, society as a whole has a hard time dealing with that. It's easier to criticize others, downplay their achievements, and assert yourself than to acknowledge greatness in someone who shares our humanity. Because admitting that greatness forces us to confront our own limitations. Admiring imperfect idols shows that what separates us from greatness isn't the impossible, but choices, effort, and circumstances we often lack the courage to face. In today's world, where everything is exposed and analyzed, this rejection is even easier and clearer. After all these flaws and complexities are very apparent. They're practically impossible to hide. And that's why I say, those who saw Senna saw him, and those who didn't will never see anything like that again.
He wasn't afraid. That's what I loved about him.
If you enjoyed this video, check out these two. For something deeper and more intense, explore my series. Click the link to learn more.